is simply behind and appearing as the of events and creatures in this universe, simply one energy, and you're it, and everything is it. And the work of Zen is to understand that, as to say, so as to feel it in your bones. But Zen has nothing to say about what that energy is. And this, of course, gives the impression in the minds of Westerners that it is like, we would say, blind energy. Because the only alternative to that we can propose, thinking in terms of our tradition, is that it's something like God. That is to say, a kind of cosmic ego, an intelligent being, almost person. But that, in Buddhistic view, would be as far off the point as thinking of it as blind energy. The reason why this word suchness is used is to leave the whole thing open and absolutely free from definition. Because the whole point about this energy is that it should be unformulated. That is not to say formless in the sense of, some kind of goo, which is just a featureless mess. It means that at the basis of everything, there is something which in the nature of things never could be made an object, discerned, figured out, explained.
And thus, in this way,
or in just the same way,
you might say,
just exactly the same way,
turn around our
the eyes, when seeing, apparently have no color and no form of their own. If the eyes had a form of their own, they would distort all the forms that we see, and perhaps in some sense they do. If the eyes had a color of their own, that is to say, if the lens color, it would screen out that color in nature. And so you would never see it. You would never be aware of it. But we are not aware of the color of the eye, the lens, because it is basic to all sight. And so in exactly the same way, one would never be aware of the structure, the nature of the basic energy of the world, because you are it. And everything is it. And you might say, well, that doesn't make any difference then. It doesn't. But it does make a difference in the feeling of a person who realizes that that is so. Although it doesn't make any particular difference to anything that happens, except this one important matter. If there were no eye, there would be no sight. It's true, we have this sight and that, and the structure of the eye doesn't make any difference to this sight and that. But upon it depends the possibility of seeing. And so upon this energy depends the whole possibility of there being a universe. That's rather important, but it's so important that we overlook it. It doesn't enter, shall we say, into practical considerations and prognostications. That's true. And therefore, modern logicians in the philosophy departments will argue that all assertions about this energy, as that it is there at all, are meaningless. And that, in a way, is true. Because the world itself is, from the point of view of strict logic, quite meaningless, in the sense that it is not a sign, a symbol pointing to something else. So then, while that is all taken for granted, it nevertheless makes a great deal of difference to how you feel about this world, and therefore to how you act. If you know that there is just this and that it is you, and that it is beyond time, beyond space, beyond definition, and that if you clearly come to a realization that this is how things are, it gives you a certain bounce. You can enter into life with an abandon, with a freedom from basic terror, which you would not ordinarily have. Yes, you can be very hooked on the form of life which you are now living. You can consider that myself, say as Alan Watts, is an immensely important event, one which I wish to preserve and continue as long as possible. But the truth of the matter is that I know I won't be able to. And that everything falls apart in the end. But if you realize this fundamental energy, you have the prospect of appearing again in innumerable forms, all of which, when you're in them, will seem just as important as this one you have now. Just as problematic, perhaps, too. Only this is not something to be believed in, because if you believe that that is so upon hearsay, then you have missed the point. You don't need to believe in this. You don't need to formulate it. You don't need to hang on to it in any way, because you can't get away from it. There is no need to believe in it. And if you do believe in it, it indicates that you have some doubts in the matter. That is why Zen has been called the religion of no religion. You don't need, as it were, to cling to yourself. Faith in yourself is not holding on to yourself. And that is why when some Zen master is given by his student the statement, 10,000 formations, one suchness, the Zen master says, get rid of it. And that is why also in the practice of certain forms of Zen meditation, there is a rugged struggle of the person to get beyond all formulations whatsoever, to throw away all hang-ups, to endure long hours of sitting with aching knees, and perpetual frustration in trying to get hold of what all this is about. With tremendous earnestness, I've got to find out what the mystery of life is, who I am, what this energy is. And you go, and he knocks down every formulation you bring to him. Because you don't need one. Only the ordinary person, on hearing that you don't need one, will forget all about it and go and think about something else. So he never crosses the barrier. And when you do see it, it is so obvious, so totally obvious that there is just one energy, and that consciousness and unconsciousness, being and not being, life and death are its polarities. It is always undulating in this way. Now you see it, now you don't. Now it's here, now it isn't. Because that on and off is the energy. We wouldn't know the energy was there unless it was vibrating. And the only way to vibrate is to go on and off. So life and death. It's like that. And that's what Zen about. And that's all it's about. Of course, other things derive from that. In Zen training, the first thing to do is to understand that, to get the feeling of its complete obviousness. But then what follows from that is how does a person who feels that way live in this world? What do you do about other people who don't see that that's so? What do you do about conducting yourself in this world? That is the really difficult part of Zen training. There is at first the breakthrough, which involves certain difficulties, but thereafter there's the whole question of learning compassion and tact and skill, as Jesus put it, to be wise as serpents and gentle as doves. And that is really what takes most of the time. You might divide then the training in Zen into two stages corresponding to the two great schools of Buddhism. Hinayana stage and the Mahayana stage. The Hinayana stage is to get to nirvana, to get to living in the great void. But then the Mahayana stage is to come back, as the Bodhisattva comes back from nirvana, out of compassion for all sentient beings, to help even the grass to become enlightened. And so it is that Mahayana aspect of Zen which occupies most of the time of learning to be proficient in Zen. Well, I say this by way of introduction, just to make everything clear from the start, and without being deceptive about it or befuddling you with Zen stories, where, although they are really quite clear, the point doesn't get across very easily to Westerners, except as something fascinating. The principle, of course, underlying Zen stories, with all their strangely seeming irrelevant remarks, is quite simple. It's all explained in the Sutra of the Sixth Patriarch, Huineng, when he says, if somebody asks you a question about matters sacred, always answer in terms of matters profane. If they ask you about ultimate reality, answer in terms of everyday life. If they ask you about everyday life, answer in terms of ultimate reality. Master, please hand me the knife. And he hands him the knife blade first. Please give me the other end. What would you do with the other end? This is answering an everyday matter in terms of the metaphysical. Master, what is the fundamental principle of Buddhism? There is enough breeze in this fan to keep me cool. That is answering the metaphysical in terms of the everyday. And that's more or less the principle it works on. Now, people who go to Japan to study Zen have read about it in the writings of Suzuki and R.H. Blythe and myself, and very often they're in for a curious shock. They suppose that Zen people are kind of Quakerish. That is to say, very simple, very unritualistic, iconoclastic, because they've read stories about tearing up sutras and burning Buddhas. And they suppose also that Zen people live with the utmost frugality and simplicity in very plain dwellings. And they're shocked to find that procedures in a Zen monastery, in Zen temples, are highly ritualistic. That the temple buildings and grounds are positively sumptuous. And that Zen is existing in terms of a big ecclesiastical organization, with hierarchies, with formulations, with all the things that one would recognize as characteristic of ecclesiastical organizations all over the world. I have perhaps the advantage over some students of having been deeply involved in Christian ecclesiastical organizations, and therefore I am able to recognize the traits and the foibles of this sort of professional community anywhere in the world. But in order to see that, you have first to penetrate through a certain superficial glamour. Zen to Zen people is quite an everyday matter. But to the outsider, the chants, the incense, the mysterious iconography of the Buddhas, the serene expressions of Zen masters on the real mysterious East, the occult tradition, the great masters of wisdom. And I suppose likewise, to some Indian or Japanese visitor, the mysteries of the Catholic Church must be very glamorous and appear in much the same guise as their things appear to us. Now it must be understood, therefore, that Zen in Japan today has indeed hardened into a traditional ecclesiastical tradition, you know. Most of the monks in the monasteries are the sons of priests. You see, when a Zen monastery is a seminary more than a monastery. It's a training school. It isn't a monastery in our sense where you take life vows and you enter into the monastery for your whole life with the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. It's a training school from which you graduate in due course when the teacher thinks you are ready. And after you graduate from the Sodo, which simply means the soul is a Sino-Japanese way of pronouncing Sangha, which means the order of followers of the Buddha who have taken the vows of the bhikshu, or we would say monk. Monk isn't really the right word. And do means hall. So, when you've taken the training, there are various options open to you. And the usual one is to become a temple priest. Every Zen monastery stands in the middle of an enormous campus. There is the training center, and then surrounding it ever so many separate buildings which are individual temples. And these temples were originally built by wealthy patrons of the monastery to provide a place where a priest would for all time chant sutras for the future assistance of the wealthy patron through his future incarnations. And likewise in villages all over Japan, there are temples of the various sects of Buddhism to serve the villagers, where the priest will recite the sutras on the occasion of death, or help out in sickness, or offer memorial services for the ancestors. And that's the main job of these people. Occasionally they will take a few students for meditation, but by and large, the Zen priest is a sutra chanter, and this is true of almost all Buddhist priests, serving the community in much the same way as a Catholic priest serves a parish. But you see, these temples are passed down in the family from father to son. So my oldest son should take over the temple from me if I'm a priest. So I say, you go to the Zen monastery, and you train there until the teacher says you're ready, and then you can come back and help me out around the temple, and when I die or retire, you take it over. So most of the boys, and they are boys, many of them just out of high school, some of them are just out of college. The Zen sect runs one or two colleges to prepare its students for the monastery, and therefore the college curriculum is oriented in a Buddhist direction, as well as teaching some basic subjects, mathematics and literature and so on, at college level. But therefore, the boys in there are not really there because they have a strong vocation for it. They're there because they've been sent there through parental authority. And therefore it is not surprising that their attitude to Zen is rather mechanical. I noticed this more in the Soto sect than in the Rinzai sect. I made 2 visits to Eiheiji, which is a most gorgeous monastery, about 120 miles north of Kyoto in the mountains. It is one of the most beautiful places on earth. Tremendous place. And about 100 odd monks are studying there. But those monks are, as far as I can see, principally preoccupied with manners. They are absolutely fanatical, one might say, about good form. And it's true, they are beautiful-looking people, very industrious, they are neat to a fault. You could lick the floor in the toilets. It's so clean. It's orderly, precise, and the chief monks and priors, you might call them, are very strict. But to a great extent, it's a kind of mechanical existence. They are going through a prolonged hazing process, as it were, in order to be fit to take over Father's job and to have Zen style. Zen style is very important, just as we train physicians to have a good bedside manner, or a priest to behave as a priest, in the style of a priest. And that carries with it a certain aura of tradition and authority and conviction. And so these boys are trained very carefully to walk, to carry themselves, to speak and behave according to Zen style. And it's very pleasant, I must say. They are very presentable people. They are unlike ordinary Japanese people in that they're not nervous. They don't giggle when embarrassed. Difficult to embarrass them. And occasionally, every now and then, one of them turns out to be an enthusiast and really gets through with Zen. But by and large, I'm sorry to say that in both the Rinzai and the Soto schools, a large number of products are graduated who really have no feeling for Zen, who never quite got the point, but managed to struggle through the motions. And thus there are increasingly few great teachers of Zen in the country.
He's such a smart ass.
There is, however, an awakening going on. And times are